Introversion.
Introverted.
Yes, yes. I'm not going to describe this one. What do you think that is?
Outcome focused.
Outcome focused.
Yeah. Um, and then we move that over. This, then what do you think that would be then? I think that's quite self-explanatory.
Discipline driven.
Yes. Brilliant. So it's a lot easier when you're using, because I use this game with people that are going through this, and it's a lot harder. You've got to coax them a lot, but we're practitioners. So who do you think this is then? Evidence-based.
Just gave it away.
Okay, so down to
Down
earth.
to earth.
Yeah, okay.
Collaborative.
Yeah,
People focused.
no.
Extroverted.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I mean,
And the last one, what do you think? It's the last aspect that we've got here.
Inspiration driven.
Inspiration.
Yes. Brilliant. So it's just a game that I play with people I'm working with, just so they can start thinking a bit differently and associating besides the words to the aspects as well. So the first thing I'm going to go into is I'm going to actually try and move my picture because I'm getting distracted by your beautiful faces. So just moving you to my other screen. So one of the organizations I work with in the UK were a big water company. And they were looking for some strategic development. And the issue that we had was they were a new team that were formed through restructure, and there were huge personality clashes. So lots of conflict, got to the point where the exec director didn't know what to do with the team because they weren't talking to each other. And this started leaking into the teams. So in the consultation, I said, let's do one last thing. Let's bring them aware about themselves. Let's use Lumina to help them understand their differences and possibly how they interact with the team as well. So I did the usual process for those that might be new. So you do the individual consultation with them, go through their portrait, help them think about themselves. So I did about 3 sessions, so 3.5-hour sessions with them first. I then moved on to doing peer-to-peer coaching. But because there was a trust in this team, there were conflict between people, I asked them to choose somebody that they trusted. And when they came together, I asked them to think about themselves, that individual, but then also from a team perspective, when they're looking across the Lumina, what did they think they needed to do to try and shift the team to be more strategic as a leadership team? We then came into the strategic leadership team away day and then came to an action plan. So what do we do in this away day? I must admit, I was very nervous going into this away day based on how much conflict there was. You have people that weren't talking to each other. So what I thought we would do, instead of it being about just them, I wanted to bring it up back to the team level. So we started off with their strategy. So before we moved into the mats, we spent the morning talking about what is their strategy. They hadn't even formulated. They'd been together for a year and they couldn't even come to agreement around their strategy. So we spend time talking about their strategy and then thinking about their corporate behaviors. What did they need to do to deliver this high level strategy? We then had a break and then came back in and then started doing some mat work. So we'll come back to this. But what we did on that mat work before we could actually then consolidate their behaviors was I stood and held the center for them to try and keep their feedback objective. So what we did is we got them to stand around as you would on a mat, and start talking with each other around what they felt and where they were. So the individual that you can see here was the person that brought the most conflict into the team. And what we found going through her profile was that she spent a lot of time in situational strength, so making a lot of conscious effort to match the team. So, which was a big aha for her. So she was coming into a place where she wasn't naturally behaving. So she was causing quite a lot of friction with people, and she admitted that. And that was the first step to changing the team and then being able to open up and have a good conversation. So whenever somebody would give a feeling or a subjective point of view, my space was, how can we reposition that against the aspects or the qualities? So how can we make this less about the individual? How can we make this about the qualities and make it quite objective? So it was really trying to bring them into a space where they could have a conversation without conflict. And I think that's one of the great things about Lumina is being able to give people a different language And we were able to get to a point. We spent about 2.5 hours moving around the mats in different ways, bringing out the everyday, bringing out the overextended. And there were so many aha moments, especially when we look at, so number 7 was the individual that was causing a lot of the conflict, and her and this individual always butted heads. But seeing this, they were able to understand why. One's going into control. I'm going to control my space. The other one's going, I need to deliver. I'm going to deliver and not listen to you when you're an outcome focused and really in that overextended. When they realized that, they were able to step back a bit. So it was a really good exercise before we then could come back and start thinking about them as a team. And so what I did then to make sure that they could understand their behaviors, we then started mapping their behaviors onto the mat. So this was done with post-it notes. So we mapped their behaviors onto the mat to say, well, what are the qualities and aspects that you could use in your behaviors to deliver your strategy? But what this helped us understand is where their development areas were. Because if we go back, you can see here, here's where they need to develop, because a lot of people don't outcome focus on an every day. So they were able to then go, oh, okay, we'll use this individual to help us build that big picture thinking, and we'll help these people bring us into that people focused area. So it was really good because they were then able to bring the individual who felt so excluded from the team into the fold to help them, and she felt like she had a purpose within that. So what we were able to do from that is get to a point where they had a 6-month plan, and they talked about being empathetic. So just from going through that process of let's be objective, let's listen and let's hear from each other, they were able to come up with this 6-month plan on what they were going to do to be a good leadership team. And for me, I think the biggest thing was when they said we're going to be more empathetic towards each other. And it just helped them open up a bit more and see their own impact, but also how they might be excluding others, as well as how that works on their strategic aspects as well. So that was just one of the commitments they came into, and they came up with a 30-minute one-to-one coaching using the app. So they wanted to really continue building on these relationships. So it just shows you the power of going from not talking to being able to go, right, I'm going to build these relationships and work with these people. And they've continued to do that. And they've been able to see their structure changing and deliver their strategies as well and put that into their objectives. Okay. I think we're holding questions to the end. So that was the one aspect, so linking it to strategic leadership. This other company I'm working with at the moment was around forming, storming, and norming in a virtual world. So working with the head of people experience, so a development team that supports a function of about 700 people, 2 long-standing members, and the rest of the people coming into the team were new, and it was in the virtual during COVID. So we put together an interactive self-discovery of 6 months using Lumina. Very intensive program. So every 6 weeks we would have one-to-one, every 6 weeks we'd have a team building, every 6 weeks we'd have a peer-to-peer coaching, to get to the point where we could have that high performance charter and have coaching pairs. So this is a process I went through, and I loved working with this team. What we did was, when I came into the business, I helped them develop this effective leadership program and framework, because they didn't have anything to help managers lead virtually. So what I did is I attached Lumina straight away to, well, this is what's going to help you. So they could see how it was going to help them drive their behavior. So you can see a pattern here with what I like to do. I like to link back to the corporate behaviors to make sure that it starts integrating into the fabric of what they need and what they want to do. So throughout, gamification is so important for me, and that might just be because I'm a creative. I like to have fun, and I think it just helps people really socialize what this looks like and what this means. So at the start of every session, I would do some form of guess who. And wouldn't have the names underneath here. I included myself in the team because I've been working with them for so long, that I decided to include myself in that as well. And so we play games around, who do you think this is? And if there was a mismatch, we would then start talking through, well, why is that mismatch there? What is it that made you think that that person might be more competitive, but actually they're more collaborative. So then people could start seeing how they are viewed as well. So it just opens a very different conversation for individuals. And you can have really great coaching around this, because people are like, oh my goodness, I would have thought that you, let's say for me, somebody thought that I was this person in the middle. So Paul, where his overextended is quite, you know, quite centered in the middle. And, you know, there's various aspects as why that could be. There could be some self-reporting on not understanding themselves. There could be other aspects around people that don't have a wider splash, but they thought that was me because they saw me as quite calm. I don't feel like I am under pressure. So it's just interesting to have those conversations to see what's going on. So what we then did is there's a tool, I don't know if you've seen it, there's the workbook that's available, that's come out. And it's an interactive workbook that you can send to individuals that they can play around with, capture and use. So before the first team session, we had the individual sessions. I got them to reflect on them at the unique strengths of the team. And we played the card game. And because it was virtual, we had to use Teams. What I did is I pasted the card into a PowerPoint, and then I just stuck the individual's sticker that they chose onto here, so we could then have a representation. And then we did the same thing with what the unique qualities are for around the mandala. And what this helped is they then had this pack, they could go away, they could see where the unique strengths were. But what it helped us understand is that this is a very outcome focused team. They were very reactive. And so therefore they're pushing a lot onto the business. And there was a lot of feedback coming back, like, we don't know what's going on from the team, because there's just so much stuff coming out, and they were just so competitive. They wanted to be the first in everything, but there wasn't enough stepping back and taking that big picture thinking. And for the leader, he realized that he had hired to type, and he hadn't diversified his hiring and thinking about what he needed across a spectrum in his team as well. So there was a lot of coaching with him and I around that, which was very interesting, for him to then think about what did he need to do to step back a bit instead of being driven by the culture of the organization as well. Then they went away after that session and we used the app. So this is where, you know, I got them to go away, have 45 minutes each where they spend some time learning about each other. But I try to structure the feedback a bit. So using grow. So I asked them, you know, what is the goal that they're trying to share? What's their reality? So really thinking about that person. What is the objective of you giving this feedback? Because sometimes people go in, as you will know as practitioners, with, I'm just going to give this feedback, but how will that person then go forward with it? So this is what they had to do and use as we went away. While they did that, we then also had some other homework to do. Using Spark Coach, so another great tool for those that are new to this. There's a lot available to us, but being able to understand how to use it's important. So what I got them to do is use their workbook, think about their journey to composure. So journey to composure is taking your overextended and thinking about how you can use your unique strengths to pull you back into a place where you're not overextended. So got them to think about that, and then got them to think about the two people they wanted to build rapport with. And there's a worksheet that helps you work through that. And why I wanted to do that is to make sure that when we started looking at Spark Coach, it didn't overwhelm, because there's a lot in there. When you go into Spark Coach and you look through it, there's a lot of information. So by being able to have these targeted approach, we're then able to really focus on some areas and then get an understanding of the tool. But the great thing about the building rapport is I use Spark Coach with the app, and I got them to step into the people's shoes. So I asked them to put the person on the app, put them over and ask them to go through what are the aspects you find difficult about this individual that you don't feel that you can connect with, and let's understand it. Let's go into Spark Coach. Let's look at the qualities, what that is, how that's different to you. They were then able to really step into understanding that person. So you're using the combination of the portrait, the app and the coach to really get them into that space. We then went into the last session where we really focused on this journey to composure and their overextensions, because this is the aha moments people have, especially when they don't realize the impact. So we walked through their journey to composure. So each individual was able to explain to the teams, you know, what were their triggers, What was the self-talk when they were in there? What did it look like? And what did they think it felt like for other people? And there's a great resource here that Nicole shared with us, which is her journey to composure that she ran with Anne-Maria. So we spent some time on this, just thinking that through, and everyone got time to map themselves onto this journey to composure. And what you can see here is throughout this whole time, we're building a picture of the team that they can then keep and continue using. We then moved into the team dynamics. You can see that there's so much, and this is why there's a 6-month journey, because you want to break down and really get them to understand the different aspects of the team as well. And this, I think, is a great way to try and close it all down. We've just spent this whole journey going through all this understanding, and this kind of just brings it all together where you can see the underlying, where they goes every day. And for this team, you could definitely see when people went into these and people were able to go, oh yes, I've seen Sarah do that. I've seen when she goes people focused, she becomes very empathetic and she's collaborating all the time. And when I talk to her about her people, she becomes so protective. And now I understand why. And, you know, for myself and Paul, we've become very discipline focused or discipline driven. And I'm normally very collaborative and out there, and people could see me become very insular in what I was doing. And just wanted to show you a few tools that are available. So if you can't do the map work, because you know on the map when you're doing the overextended, you can turn over and people can see, you know, how people viewed. This is a tool that's available to you, so you can actually still do the map work. Well, this is how people view you on PowerPoint, which is really helpful. And on the portal, so for those that are new, there's a great portal. There are so many resources available to you. Customize them with this organization. I did not use the color because they had done insights as a tool before. So I didn't want them to associate the colors that are in Lumina with insights because they already started doing that. So I decided to rather keep to the aspects and associate them with the aspects instead, just to avoid that association and confusion as well around the tool. So the end of that was bringing it back to the effective leadership framework. So we spend time working on their purpose, thinking about themselves as a team, what their strengths were. And I associated this high performance charter around that. So straightforward leadership is how do they lead themselves? So what did they want to achieve and what do they want to maintain? So what were their strengths as individuals and what were their development areas? And through this, we were able to have coaching partnerships because you could see who had strengths in certain areas and how they could match together. And then up here, what we did was this was the development areas of the team. So they needed to develop being more big picture thinking and inspiration driven, and how they were going to deliver for the business being purposeful was to continue being outcome focused and people focused as a team. So that's my quick whistle stop tour. I know there's a lot in there, but you'll be getting these slides as well. So Nicole, I don't know how you want to handle the next, do you want to have questions or do we want to go into groups for the breakouts?
Thanks so much, Megan, for the richness of what you shared. I'm sure there's quite a few questions. So Romy, can you see if there's any questions in the chat, or if people just want to unmute, and if you've got questions around either of the different processes to ask Megan, if you want some more clarity before we go into the breakouts.
No questions in the chat at the moment, Nicole.
Okay, so maybe I'll ask one while people are unmuting and digesting this wealth of application. I was interested when you said around, and I understand the value definitely around focusing on aspects instead of colors, and I do the same. But I often find if they've used insights before, because there's a direct kind of correlation between the colors, that it's in fact quite useful to have that as a bit of a foundation to then, you know, like a platform to move beyond. This is the next level. This is now we're doing a deeper dive. So I was just interested around why you consciously wanted to avoid that association.
I think it's preference. I think for me, when insights is used, sometimes people type themselves into I'm a driver or I'm a this, and they don't allow themselves the space to think beyond that. And I found that with this team that they were starting to go, but I've done this insight, so I'm this color and that's what I am. And they weren't able to move beyond the dynamics of what they could be. So that's why I made that conscious effort to really think about let's look at the duality, let's move beyond the color and look at the duality of the personality. So that was why. Yeah.
Okay, Fine. So it's not so much about the actual meaning of the colors, it's more about the model and to be able to kind of expand their thinking beyond that.
Absolutely.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, brilliant. Estelle.
Oh, thanks, Megan. That was again inspiring. And I would like to know, just from a business point of view for companies, consulting, do you do journey to composure for the team? I've only used it for individual managers when I had to work with them and help them. But do you actually do it for the whole team at the same time?
Do you want to take the screen down unless people want to refer back to a slide?
I'm
so we
going.
can see everything? Okay.
Sorry, I'm just having a hair in my. Do you know what?
Yeah.
I haven't done that before. I've only ever done it as at an individual level, and yeah, I mean that's an interesting question. I don't know if anyone else has done that, but I've never, and I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about it.
So I've done it mainly at the team level, actually. So where it's appropriate to do at a part of the coaching session as a follow-up to coaching session, but I find it very powerful in within a team session, because for me it's one of those significant shifts and moments of transformation is when people really identify what are their personal triggers, what's the underlying core beliefs that have been motivating that certain behavior. And then when they use a journey to composure model, which by the way, the E version is going to be released on the 5th of April. So that's all confirmed. So we're very excited with that, because the E version takes you step by step. There's something around an open sharing on the team for people to really walk the journey with another. So in terms of creating bonding and understanding, it's very powerful. And typically I'll do 1 or 2 for the whole team based on volunteers who really want the work. And then they will do it in pairs, and then they'll come back and they'll share their key insights as a whole group.
Okay, so still more pairing more than let's say 15 people on executive.
Well, actually,
okay.
what's really nice, just to say that once they've gone off in their breakout rooms and they've coached each other around the journey to composure, they then all come back. I can show you some examples if you want later, but they all draw on the mat at the same time. So you see all these wonderful arrows and drawings where everybody will share their journey together. And then different conversations will emerge from that around, oh, right, now I understand, and also who they need to support them on their different journeys. It may not be their coach partner, it could be someone else.
Okay, so the focus is then on how to get yourself through the journey of composure, and not perhaps a specific trigger. Let's say we have a lot of conflict in a team, and let's say the trigger is when people start shouting at each other, and then everything goes wrong after that. So it's not that we take a group problem type of, and then see what would we do as a group together or a team together. We actually can see, let's teach you the skill of using the journey to composure, so that in a situation you use it correctly.
I absolutely love that, Estelle. And I'm thinking that it's informally come up through a process of the team strategy, the gap analysis of strategy, but at the tool level, we've used it more individually and then around the support, so the personal transformation. But I love that idea around looking at a group overextension when you look at the overextended wheels. Like, I was also really interested, Megan, that because often when I say kind of guess yours and the splashes, I typically focus on the everyday or the combination one. So that was a great idea to bring out just the overextended. And then that would be a wonderful way to then say, okay, so do we have a collective overextension?
Yeah.
What triggers us? What's the impact? And we could absolutely go through that process. So I love that idea.
Me too. Yeah.
Good ideas. Yeah.
Play with it.
Yeah. Thank you. Welcome, Elaine. Cheryl joined us. Fantastic. Stephen. So any other questions? Thanks, Steve. Was that a hi or a question? That was a hi. Okay. Any thoughts or reflections from there, or processes that you run that are similar, or anything that you think you can take away? Are you still processing? Joan?
Nicole, I'll just share with Estelle on the journey of composure. In our organization, we run team effectiveness with Lumina. And usually when we get to the journey of composure, we just ask for volunteers, 1 or 2 volunteers to explain the process and how it works. And I guarantee you by the end, they all stand up, me next, I want to go next. But it is still on an individual basis. I'm also going to try it on the team one next time. And what I found about this journey of composure, specifically, I'm very red and blue, and it brings out the green in me to watch the journey of composure, because all of a sudden I understand where these individuals are coming from, where my red personality was just like, put on your big gold panties, let's cope with it. And then when I do the journey of composure with them, and I think it's very effective for teams, specifically very red teams, to do that exercise.
This is like music to my ears, Kathy, because I know your process around embracing it. So it's wonderful. So Doug's got a question. I don't know if you want to unmute, or if you want Romeo.
I mean, yeah, I can see that. Thanks, Doug. I think with the pen on the first example, I think I probably would have spent a lot more time before going into that strategic session with them individually. I think there was so much conflict and so much distrust that it took us a while to get to a place where we could actually have some kind of decent conversation. So I think for me, that was my biggest learning, is trying to get them to a better place mentally before we throw them into this space where they have to be open and honest. We got there in the end, but we probably wouldn't have needed 2.5 hours to try and get them to be objective and be open, had I spent a bit more time with them beforehand, I think.
So before the actual session itself.
Yeah, I think definitely, because
what do you do in the beginning, kind of in your early process, to develop that kind of safety and openness? I mean, so you've got the card game that you showed us. Do you talk about Viktor Frankl's work and space in between?
So, yeah, I spend time, depending on the individual need, and with this one individual, it was her realization that she was maybe in the wrong role. So I probably would have spent a bit more time with her, thinking about what does that mean to her. She's got this loss of identity. So there was some identity work that we did with her as well, in terms of, well, you might not be in the wrong role, you might just be using the wrong aspects to perform in your role. So there's that element of that. And one of the other individuals around trust. So it was defining, what does trust mean to them, and why don't they trust their team, and really working with them in that space around, well, what is trust. And I missed a point. Do you?
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, so it depends on the individual, really, Nicole, and what you would do. But I don't use any of the card tools or anything in my pre-coaching. That's all. I always do that in the group sessions. In my pre-coaching, I always do based on the portrait, based on their need, and then think about how we then work through that in a coaching context.
No, I can add, perhaps I did the same, Megan, with a specific company said, they told me, you're not going to help us. This is impossible.
Possible.
Yeah, difficult people, this is not going to work. And my site was one of my earlier companies with Lumina. I've done other work with them, so it was a bit scary. But anyway, and then I did it. I downloaded all the portraits, and I had with every person in our session, I invoiced them basically from the start, a 1 hour session with every person. So I did the diagram with the overextended and everything, showing them. And then I did on the last 25 minutes with every individual a journey to composure. And what it helped at the end, when I had to give feedback to the company, I actually could identify quite a few problems in the company, which everybody didn't felt free to express, so we could then have a better view. And then on the day, 2 days or 3 days when we had our workshop, as you said, then they basically trusted the objectivity of the whole process, and they trusted the validity of Lumina, as to, because it's spot on. I mean, you cannot hide. And that made everything much easier, and we played the games much easier in that context.
Yeah, so the value of the one-to-one coaching. I'm just thinking about a team that I recently worked with that were also exceptionally, I'd say cynical, but lots of silo work. They were a global team that were having to come together under the South African leader that was now head of group, which was very challenging for all the African leaders. And so there were many kind of political and as well as pragmatic impacts. And they didn't budget for the one-to-one coaching beforehand. And I had them for one day that they wanted to create trust and a whole new way of working, and they didn't have a clear common strategy. And we had a phenomenal session and we achieved the goals. And if I look back and think how, I think one of the key ways was really ensuring coaching just the new leader around being really vulnerable when he opened the session, being authentic and vulnerable, speaking about his frailties, where he's lacking, his fears, his challenges, and so surprised the team because there was a bit of this kind of strong ego macho, which he just knocked out. And he said, and he spoke to each person, the value of what he saw in them and what the potential if we come together. And then even though I was very kind of conscious of time, because there were about 12 people in this session, and there was a lot that the process to kind of get the movement, but I decided to invest up front to let everybody do a check-in without any kind of tools, but just allow them to speak what was on their mind around their, the value they believe they could bring, their concerns for their teams, for the future, for the business, their hopes. And everyone just shared, and we gathered it all in, and then so they could also see some of the key themes up front. And then moving from there, we moved into the whole Viktor Frankl work around, there's no right, there's no wrong, there's just we're all different. The space in between, how we shop, because there was a lot of kind of victim mentality also coming through, is like, this is what you're doing to us, and we're being kind of closed and suffocated, we have no voice. But they were able to see in the conversation that you've got to take your voice, you've got to use your voice, you've got to take the space and take the seat. And it was a focused, honest, quite courageous. Everyone's became quite courageous, and the leader who's been through a lot of processes previously said that he'd never experienced the way that the journey the group was taken on, and valued not just facilitation, but all the methodology of the language, and using their portraits, putting up their 24 qualities, and moving into the team charter, which I think is so powerful, with strengths, development areas, communication preferences, and then everyone got feedback. So in fact, they wanted to extend the day by, I think it was an hour and a half, because everyone wanted to share so deeply, to say things they hadn't been able to say before. But I have often found that the process itself can be have so many value points and create this shift through the safety. But I do find it's the leader themselves needs to create that space up front. So just see, Steve, was this process based on previous portraits being done? Are you talking about the process I just explained? Yeah, okay. So they'd all done their portraits. They didn't have a coaching session. They just arrived. They got their portraits a few days before just to read through the inner spark and to identify maybe one sentence in the inner spark that they felt conveyed them well. So when we looked at the word cloud, and later on they were able to share that sentence around it. But the splash was woven in. I didn't do the journey to composure in this session. That will be the follow-up. But very much using the 8 aspects, and then doing lots of kind of stamping on the different things to be able to use it as not a shield, but to give them a common framework and language to share more, explicitly and openly.
Nicole,
yeah.
How did you get them to trust, to have that environment, the environment that they knew they could say what they needed to say in front of their CEO? How did you get that so quickly?
I think it was because the leader paved the way. I think he role modeled it. So it was coaching him to be really honest and then keep weaving back quotes of what he said and, you know, pulling people out through it. But I do think that that scene was said. I did do that trust exercise as well, whereby they can look at themselves versus their key stakeholders. How are they perceived? And they were able to share that they, for good reason, were not respected by the organization and real shifts needed to be made.
Okay. Thanks.
But I do think that, you know, I think it's a combination. It's a combination of the authenticity of the leader, the way you facilitate it, and then the process itself carrying them. Because when you're saying there's no right or wrong, you know, we are all magnificently unique, 8.5 billion people in the world, each of us with our own reality, perception, mountaintop. We have to get off ours, travel up someone else. You know, that we're taking away any expectation of rightness.
Yeah.
We're all just on this journey together with our challenges. Let's understand it. Let's look at the human behind. Let's try and aim for the essence of what people intend, you know, all about the unconditional positive regard. So I think that languaging is important up front to set the scene, that there's just no judgment here. We're all learning and we will all mess up a lot. But hey, let's shine a light on that, on our own darkness, on the team's darkness, and let's see how we can convert that to open up to some growth and learning. So Megan, do you want to answer any of these other ones, or should we move into the breakouts? So I need my glasses. I'm thinking by getting close to the screen, I'm going to see it, but I'm actually now, so it doesn't help.
I think there's only one other question then, Nicole, around about did I conduct coaching physically or virtually? For the second one, I did it all virtual because we were in the pandemic, but for Pennon was all coaching physically. So, you know, and it worked well in both settings, you know, and that's the power of being able to have the tool with you as well, because you've got something to then look at and it's not just a virtual room. So, yeah.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Amazing.
Deja.
Can I just ask you one question before we move into the groups? The model that you have at the end, is that a model that you've created with the organization, the collaborative leader? And
Yeah. So I went and the main aspect of my role was to go in and help them transition from in office, because they were an operations team call center and they all had to work from home and a lot of them hadn't done it. So I created that effective leadership framework, and behind it's how you do this virtually. So yeah, so that's now they're almost their behavioral framework that they use. Yeah.
fantastic. And then you've then mapped the qualities kind of into that, or when you're
Into
working
that.
with it, you refer.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Julie, welcome. Okay, so Megan, do you have the question for the breakouts on the slide, or should we just?
I do. I wonder if I put them into the chat.
Yeah,
It might be easier. So they're there. Okay.
I will. Didn't see you appear there. Wonderful to have you. So there's I think groups of 4, Romy, do you think? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So just bringing them up. Sorry, Nicole.
Okay. So, well, I think people can they see the, okay, I'm just going to work out the breakouts in the meantime. So you're all happy to go into the breakouts now? Yeah, I'm just going to do it randomly.
So I'll just put the 2 different questions that people can work on into the chat.
Can you just read them for us? Do you mind me?
Yeah. So if we had to create a leadership program, how would you use Lumina tools in that program? And what creative ways can you work with your clients to help Lumina become part of their organizational culture?
And Joan, how was it?
It was very interesting because who did I have in the room with me? Romney, Stephen, who had to leave, and Kathy. And so, you know, Kathy shared actually some of the practical solutions that she also has, where she had practical objects in the offline sessions, like a Rubik's Cube, for example. She shared the story of the chameleon, that they use a chameleon in painting. And that's a brilliant idea. And so Kathy, you mentioned that, you know, you can't really do it offline and virtually, but I'd say that if you were prepped, I think you could. you could still do your communion. They just have to have it then behind them or put it on the wall or something like.
Yeah, because I mean, you give everyone one patch, don't you, to draw? So you could just send them the patch with the, you know, the felt tips, or you also use Lego a lot at RCL Foods, don't you?
Yes, yeah.
Everyone can have their own. I mean, it's difficult when they're creating this common, but yeah,
It was really, it was very valuable.
wonderful. Jill, what do you think of us?
Only good. That was interesting, and the exchange was, and the case study, let's call it so, was quite interesting. I have not so much experience except through you and with my customers. So, but having different cultures, that was good to exchange and to see that what sometimes functions with some will not function with others, and based on different background. And yes, thank you. That was very nice.
Okay, great. Will, hi.
I think
Hey,
Will.
hi.
Great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Good to see you.
So you were in a breakout. Any new thoughts that emerged? I think there's a time lag.
Yeah. The application of Lumina in terms of leadership and breaking down the resistance to allow vulnerability as from a human perspective on leadership side is it's something that's going to be quite a challenge. But how I viewed in terms of school environment and family setup between teenage and parents, you know, showing that there's a disconnect because they don't understand each other very well. But through the mandala and the cards alone are lining up. So even the organization sometimes, just as an introduction to try and bring it in, is to do the basic, maybe as an orientation to begin with. But I haven't that much. I was talking in terms of one of the partners planning challenge with the team leader that's resisting completely, you know. So yeah, there's a bigger portion of the business that we can use it and applied.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just checking. I think some others have had to leave, so they've said goodbye, and we will try and get their feedback, Romy, around from the other groups. So does anybody else want to share any kind of new thoughts, either from Megan's depth and diversity of her solutions? I mean, from my side, what really inspires me is the fact that it is this long-term leadership journey. And, you know, even though you shared so much with us and there's so much content, that, you know, for some they can think that's a lot, we've got to remember that that's done through a process over time at different points to make sure that the learning is landing and is then sustained to continue and to grow. So that it's just so much value there. So I so appreciate that you're sharing your slides with everybody as well. And you know, I don't know, Megs, if you've got any final kind of words of wisdom or anything to share with everybody in terms of conversations you've heard, or any advice that you would give.
Oh, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to share. I think there's so much wisdom in this whole group, you know, just speaking to Will, you know, thinking about how he used it with parents, and, you know, the fact that it goes beyond just the organization. I think I learned something today, that, you know, thinking beyond what more could we do with this to help relationships at a basic level to a wider level as well. And I think the biggest thing that I learned going through this is play around and feel safe enough to do so, because there's so much support around you to customize the tools, to work with them, and really just feel comfortable with it as well. And it works perfectly virtually. I think that's my biggest lesson from this whole pandemic, is that this works so well virtually, from a development tool. So yeah, but thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, I so appreciate it. Thanks so much, Megs. I know there's so much that you know, even that you shared in the beginning in terms of the wealth of your process, and then you honed it and put the work and effort for the community, which I really, really appreciate. So thank you, thank you, thank you.